what I'm going to talk about now is more what I've been up to lately, so not a lot of web design patterns in a while. So I'm going to talk about AI, which I think many of you are aware of and interested in. AI is a powerful tool, but I believe it's critical that we design AI systems at what I term the user, the community, and the society level. That sounds hard. So you can start, I think, by first just designing for communities beyond your direct user population. Yeah, beyond just your direct user. So going beyond what we've bashed our heads with industry for 50 years to get people to do user-centered design. We still need to do that, but we need to expand beyond that. And if you do, you're going to create AI systems that are more likely to have a positive societal impact. I've been working on defining this new model of AI design for the last year and a half or so, and today I hope to make these ideas clearer as I speak for the need for a more human-centered view of artificial intelligence. So we all know AI is taking the world by storm, whether it's in areas like scientific discovery with tools like ChatGPT and many others that have come out, to natural language processing. There's nobody here that doesn't use, for example, speech on their phone to write a text message, or translation because they're in Paris and want to say the phrase right, or taking some other language that they know nothing of and understanding it, to even using AI in fashion design. We find people in the fashion industry using AI to predict what will the styles be in the coming season so that they do a better job in terms of what they design, as well as optimizing their supply chain so that they don't have waste. But what's really been taking the public by storm over the last year is generative AI. So things like ChatGPT to answer your questions or write your essay, none of my students, Midjourney or DALL-E to generate images based on text prompt. In this case, the prompt was Ben Stearns' fashion photo shoot with decaying peonies as the main theme, to tools like Copilot for helping you code better, though we are going to see lots of Copilots to help you do something better. So many of these things are the future of AI, and they're really based on what we call foundation models. That's what's powering this generative AI. So we all know machine learning models use statistics to learn from a large amount of data how to predict an output given an input. So for generative AI, an input like give me a fashion shoot of a woman with decaying peonies may give us an image like the one on the previous slide. These models are really special in that they're very large models trained on huge swaths of the internet. They require now hundreds of millions of dollars in computational resources to train, though obviously a lot of people are trying to work to make it less, though most of that work is more on the inference side rather than training. And more often they are trained on multiple modalities, so text, images, speech, music. Now previously you had to create a model for every different task that you wanted to support. So we had one model just for example, doing speech, and a different model for doing an image recognition. What's happening is we're starting to see these models merge into foundation models. The idea is that with one very, very large model trained on a diverse set of data, you can use that to solve a variety of tasks. Sometimes right out of the box, and sometimes you might need to fine-tune the model with specific data needed for the tasks you're trying to solve. That's why we call them foundation models. You can build an application on top of these models, these foundations, without having to train the model from scratch yourself. So this is kind of the now and the future of the AI neural net revolution that really kicked off in about 2014, but only became, more aware by the public with the ChatGPT and maybe some of the image generative models right before that. But I would argue that AI has really been in our lives for many years, under the hood. A common place we see artificial intelligence making impact is in manipulating our social networks, causing people to feel bad about themselves. Research has shown, for example, young women on Instagram, or even worse, to be deceived and outraged about what's true and not true, even upending democracies all over the world. Or we see AI helping judges to set bail or sentencing for suspected criminals in a way that's been shown to be biased by race, as the studies of the Compass program in the United States has revealed. Now, because of both these harms and the benefits of AI, we founded this institute here that you're sitting in, the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI, almost 5 years ago, because we were anticipating this was going to happen. It's happened maybe a little faster than many of us thought, and many of the experts in AI thought. For those who don't know them in the room, very few AI experts were saying these things were going to happen quite at the speed that it did. But we did feel these things were happening. We saw neural net uptake happening in industry, in Google, in Microsoft, in a lot of the companies that we have consulted with, worked at, or have friends working at. And so we founded the Institute with 3 guiding principles. First, we should be guided by a concern for the impact of AI on human society. This technology is too potent to consider the effects after the fact, compelling us to really explore its ethical implications before, during, and after its development. We can't simply put it out there and say, hey, go study it and see if it's a problem. It's too late. Next, AI should be inspired by human intelligence. The human brain remains the single most sophisticated device in the known universe, and we should strive to learn all we can from its nature. So this is a belief that although deep learning has really pushed AI forward, we don't believe that's the end of the story of creating intelligent systems and machines. And we should look for, are there ideas in how the human brain works that can inspire new algorithms, as well as use AI in the study of the human brain? So taking it both ways. And so here at HAI, we have research that's funded doing both of those types of things. And then finally, as an HCI person, the one that is most true to my heart is the idea that AI should augment, not replace human capabilities. It's inevitable that AI will reshape significant swaths of the global workforce, and we need to prepare ourselves for that upheaval in coming generations. People can debate whether more jobs will be created or lost due to AI. It's likely more jobs will be created, but it's not likely actually that that will be even across the economy. Even previously with the globalization, which in fact is really a story about automation rather than offshoring. Many people think, oh, it's just we move jobs to China. It's also a story of automation. See how many people it takes to run a steel plant today versus 30 years ago. That automation actually led to just more jobs in the long run, but it hit different communities harder than others. And so we should be aware of that from a policy perspective and economic perspective. But from a design perspective, I think we need to, with proper guidance, try to design AI systems that can enhance the qualities that make us human. And to me, that's what HCI really can take a lead in, driving that model of AI. Because if you leave it just to the machine learning AI experts, they think just take some data from how someone does a job, train a system to do the same thing and replace them. They're not thinking, how do we augment people? How do we make those systems together work better? And in fact, I feel there's a historic opportunity here. On this campus in the 1960s, really AI was a big thing. It was one of 3 centers really in the world where AI was happening. And John McCarthy, who termed AI, the person who made the name, was working on AI right here at Stanford. Fortunately, we didn't have Bill Gates yet or his building to have it in. And McCarthy worked in several different locations around the campus. At the same time, early 60s, Douglas Engelbart, who I would say is the patron saint of HCI in some ways, was working at Stanford Research Institute, now called SRI, on intelligence augmentation, how to make people, how to use machines to help them solve really hard problems that the world was facing. World hunger, pollution, war. Somehow those problems still be around today, okay? There were almost 2 separate attacks on this, and in some ways, maybe even competing for government money. Engelbart sort of lost the battle. Eventually, in the early 70s, as the Vietnam War wound down, he lost his funding. AI people, they all complain about their AI winters, but they've never gone away, okay? But the user interface we all use really derives from Engelbart. And I believe we're at this historical moment again here at Stanford and many other places to use AI, which now works after 50, 60 years, to use it to actually design systems that augment human intelligence. So these two camps like can come together even right here at Stanford again. So now, because of some of the negative social impacts that I described of AI, we've really seen a proliferation of these AI for good initiatives, centers. We might even think of HAI as one such place. I see the main way most of these efforts going in two different types that I'll describe. So the first type is often made up of social scientists who notice and critique the harms of AI systems and applications that are built and deployed or at least proposed out in the field. Now, that's good. It's important to do that, but it doesn't help us design systems in the first place to apply AI in positive ways. It might avoid some problems after the fact, but we'd like to get to these warnings earlier. How do we proactively design to avoid these issues? The second type of effort, which is also, I think, both more common and often fails more, is when technologists go it alone. Typically, technologists will see some human impact area like education or health and say, hey, let's apply AI there, we'll make a positive impact. But they do it in a very naive way, and it often fails. So it often fails in the short term, like in the beginnings of the COVID crisis, where literally hundreds of systems were built using AI that ended up not doing anything useful, to even the long term. For example, in 2016, Turing Award winner Jeff Hinton said, we should stop training radiologists now, as AI will easily surpass humans within 5 years. Okay? Jeff Hinton won the Turing Award, the Nobel Prize of Computer Science for deep learning. He's a smart guy, but he was wrong about this. It's not worked out. It's not worked out in AI in radiology, not in AI in skin cancer detection, and not in AI in several other areas. Often due to the differences between the ideal data sets on which researchers train and test their algorithms and the messiness of the data and workflows found in real-world hospitals and clinics in this case. That's not to say that those algorithms won't get better and eventually work. In fact, I think many of them will. But I think what's worse is these researchers aren't solving the right problem. We shouldn't be looking, how do I replace the radiologist? For example, instead of trying to replace radiologists, we might want to have AI systems working in tandem with the radiologist to make the technology more useful, augment the radiologist's capabilities rather than replace them. My Stanford radiology and HAI colleague Kurt Langlotz writes in one of his papers, which got some good press in the New York Times, will AI replace radiologists is the wrong question. Instead, he wrote, the right answer is radiologists who use AI will replace radiologists who don't. Take that sentence and probably replace radiologists with many other jobs, particularly information jobs, and I think the sentence holds true. Now, I would claim the big problem is we don't know how to design AI systems for positive human impact. We don't know how to do it, what's different about it. And I believe there is a better way to design AI for positive human impact. The better way is what I term human-centered AI. How do we get the positive outcomes from AI? That is, what would it have taken to avoid the negative outcomes from Compass's AI-assisted sentencing, for example? And to avoid these outcomes, we need to design and analyze these systems at the 3 levels I mentioned in conjunction, in terms of the user, the community, and society, because AI systems have impacts beyond the direct user. And we need to consider that when we're doing design. I believe that if you do, you'll create technology that has a better chance of making a positive impact. So what do I mean by human-centered AI in these levels of analysis. So first, human-centered AI is about the scope of who we study to find our problems, develop our solutions, and evaluate the resulting systems that we build. So this won't be new to this audience. The first thing we need to do is have a user-centered process. That is to integrate these well-known techniques from HCI and design that account for the needs and abilities of end users of computing systems early and often, and rapidly iterate and improve design through rigorous testing. That will help us develop AI systems that hopefully work for humans rather than futilely trying to replicate humans. But my claim is that's not enough. We need to go beyond just having good process. Process is not enough. We need to have creativity. We need to creatively develop new designs that augment people by accounting for the cognitive abilities and their existing workflows. And we should base these on underlying theories about how and why people behave the way that they do. So we need to make sure that we're not just doing a design process. We also have to understand how humans work, how the mind works, how the body works. But that's not enough. As been illustrated by some of those harmful examples I mentioned previously, we can't only design around the user. That would be like designing that sentencing system just for the judge, creating a nice UI so they could understand the data, but that would ignore some of the underlying systemic issues. It would ignore the community that the system impacts, the people who are accused if it's crime, their families, the lawyers, the victims if there's a victim involved, their families. We need to understand the issues of the different communities they come from and the structural barriers that they face. For example, racism, before we can appropriately design that sentencing system. Maybe some of those people that we meet at the community level will become users and should be included at that user-centered level of design. So these levels actually have interactions between them that we need to care for. I'd claim even that's not enough. We also need to understand what are the impacts on society at large. What happens if the system is really successful and becomes almost ubiquitous? For the COMPASS system, which was used by many states and localities, what does it mean to have a large percentage of African-American males in the prison system in the US? Or a large percentage of people who are caught using illegal drugs? Those are issues that have immense societal costs. So we need to be able to forecast what might happen if the software system we're building becomes ubiquitous, and think about the potential harms and try to build in mediation for those societal impacts. Now, I hope at this point you're asking yourself, or you're saying to yourself, if you talk to yourself, that, damn, that sounds really hard. And it is hard, especially for computer scientists who don't have the training to do the type of analyses that I'm advocating. That's why you need true interdisciplinary teams. So not only technologists and AI experts, but also experts from design, experts from the social sciences and humanities, and domain expertise depending on the area. So expertise in fields such as medicine, law, or environmental science, depending what you're building. And these experts must be true partners on AI projects from the start, rather than added near the end to investigate possible harms. It's been shown time and time again. I think Facebook is a great example that simply having a team later who has to check off on trust and safety or responsibility will always lose when there's more money to be made going the other direction. Instead, the type of people with that expertise have to be on the team from the start and have the social capital that causes different design decisions to be made along the process. So to review the model so far, human-centered AI requires that we have this interdisciplinary team analyze the problem at the three levels of user, community, and society simultaneously, or at least very close in time. And there will probably be people, concepts, and findings that will inform these other levels of analysis. They're interdependent. So I want to run you through what this type of analysis might look like for two examples beyond sentencing. The first is from the literature and popular press, and the second is one of my own research projects where I'm going to critique it through this lens to show you where we might have gone wrong and how this lens is helping us do better today. So, what does the human-centered AI analysis look like for autonomous cars? Here's a Tesla with its autopilot feature or full self-driving. How many people here in this room drive a Tesla? So, to review the model so far, human-centered AI requires that we have this interdisciplinary team analyze the problem at the three levels of user, community, and society simultaneously, or at least very close in time. And there will probably be people, concepts, and findings that will inform these other levels of analysis. They're interdependent. So I want to run you through what this type of analysis might look like for two examples beyond sentencing. The first is from the literature and popular press, and the second is one of my own research projects where I'm going to critique it through this lens to show you where we might have gone wrong and how this lens is helping us do better today. So, what does the human-centered AI analysis look like for autonomous cars? Here's a Tesla with its autopilot feature or full self-driving. How many people here in this room drive a Tesla? Okay, Palo Alto crowd still kind of low. How many people here drive a car? Okay, good, you'll get it. I gave this talk in London a few months ago, and in 40 people in the room, there were only 2 people who had a car. So it was a little harder, but you'll get this. Okay, so either now or in 10 years, autonomous cars will happen. It's just a question of how much autonomy and where it's used, okay? If you're Elon Musk, you'll say, yeah, we've had that for years. And if you're Toyota, you would say, you know, that's 20 years from now or never if you want full autonomy in every traffic condition, every weather condition on every road in the world. Doesn't matter. But what I'll claim is that what most university researchers have done previously, yes, this is not a new area. There's over 30, 40 years of people working on autonomous cars. When I was a grad student at Carnegie Mellon in the early 90s, there was a huge truck that drove through Shenley Park next to the campus with about 20 Sun Microsystems workstations in it, and it was probably only going 8 or 10 miles per hour doing autonomous driving. This is a very old field. It's not new. But I would say what most university researchers and now car companies and startups have done as well is primarily look at that user-centered level. How do I just replace the driver? Main focus there. So what might the driver see on display, such as the large display in the center console of most Teslas, or what the driver sees when in autopilot mode here behind the steering wheel? What should it show, or how should we get the attention of the driver when the system's less sure of its inferences due to weather, or lack of recent maps, or due to the other cars on the road? That's mainly at the driver level. But these other levels of analysis are also quite important to solving or even posing the problem correctly. So at the community level, I might care more about other drivers and their behaviors, whether in autonomous cars or non-autonomous cars. Unsurprisingly to me, but somehow surprisingly to these researchers, people behave differently when they see an autonomous car around them. And if you live here in Palo Alto, you see autonomous cars all the time. And guess what? You drive differently when you see one of those around you. This is something they could have explored very early rather than just waiting till after they deployed it. We also care about the interactions with pedestrians and bicyclists. These have all been, in my opinion, afterthoughts for these efforts. Many of these things not really looked into deeply until they were deploying things on the road. And many of the problems might have been avoided had they considered these issues a little better at that earlier on in the conception of autonomous driving. One of the classic deaths was somebody walking a bicycle across the road at night. You know, their system thought about people could ride bikes and they could walk. Nobody thought they, would walk a bike, dead person. At the society level, we need to consider the impacts of autonomous cars on a city or a region. Maybe the impacts are not as positive as the enthusiasts might lead you to believe. Some studies have shown that autonomous cars will lead to more traffic and maybe even more deaths due to people driving more miles, people living further away, and sending cars around empty. So I live on the Stanford campus. If I'm going to go up to the city with my family to see a show, I'm not going to pay $60 to park my car there. I'll just send it down back home safely to my driveway. Or maybe I'll send it to, 10 or 15 miles south San Francisco, where maybe I can get a cheaper lot. My car is going further. Another example, I live on the Stanford campus. Maybe I don't want to spend $3 million to buy a house living on the Stanford campus, and I'll go live 2 hours to the east, somewhere in the Central Valley, and I'll drive in at 6 a.m. every morning, sleeping in my car while it drives me, or doing PowerPoint slides, because that's what faculty do, right? And again, I'm going to live further away, so now more miles are driven, okay? Now we can debate whether there'll be more deaths or not. The traffic thing, I think, is more clear. Deaths, it just depends on, how well do these systems work, and that might be a key area. Autonomous cars probably certainly would do better than drunk drivers, which are where many deaths are. I'm not here. Okay. These aren't just newspaper headlines, but are based on research. For example, by transportation experts at the University of Texas, who found, at least in the Texas Triangle mega region, which always bends my mind because it's got 4 cities, Austin, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, so 2 of them are laying on one of those lines. Autonomous cars will likely swamp traffic due to the changes these AI-based cars will bring to human behavior, like I just described. So to avoid that, we're going to have to build much bigger roads to accommodate this traffic. And that costs a lot of money. And so with this type of analysis from the start, we might decide our societal resources might be better spent on building a better public transit system. If we only analyze and design at the user-centered level at the start, we might ignore these important questions until it's too late and we have no choice. We might decide that autonomous cars are what we want because we want elders who are starting to lose their ability to drive to have still mobility and independence, or because drunk driving is a problem, that the reduction in deaths due to that might be worth it. But we don't actually make that decision. That decision is being made by people with power. These are questions of power. Who has the power to choose what we do with societal resources? Right now, that power is concentrated in a few large companies if we're talking about autonomous cars. And if we're talking about AI, large models, foundation models, are concentrated in a few large companies. And there is a power there, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So I don't want to give you the impression that there's no related work in this space. So I want to at least review some of the work so you don't feel like I'm ignoring everybody. So the field of HCI and design has been working at the user-centered level for 50 plus years. And there's many known techniques. Many of us teach them. All of you use them in your work. And there's great newer work applying some of these techniques specifically to AI. For example, this good paper that's very well cited by Amershi et al. From Microsoft Research and the University of Washington, Guidelines for Human AI Interaction from a few years ago at CHI. Great paper. At the community level, a very well-known design technique that many of you may have seen before, maybe there was a Bakehi talk, is value-sensitive design, developed by my former colleague at the University of Washington, Batya Friedman and David Hendry, which helps designers find and be explicit about the values of users rather than just the values of designers. And there's new ideas in that area, such as design justice by Costanza Chok. And at the society level, I think there's less well-known techniques on how to design for this, but there is good recent work pointing out what some of the problems are. For example, Safia Noble's well-reviewed book, Algorithms of Oppression. One of the key questions for me is how do we integrate these types of ideas into a coherent design process rather than just working at one? So I think that's where some of the research lies at this point, and that's one of the problems I'm working on with one of my PhD students, is how to make a coherent design process that looks at these 3 levels. So now that I've given you an idea of what human-centered AI is, and a process for it, I'd like to take you through one of my own projects that uses AI and show you where it's human-centered, but also where we can do better. The human-centered AI lens that I just presented you is changing this project for the better after some early missteps. So the project is called Hybrid Physical Digital Spaces. And the motivation for this project with us was that many Americans are overstressed, inactive, wasteful, uninspired, and feeling isolated in their works or in their schools. Nobody that I know, but there are people out there. We also observed that people spend much of their time inside the built environment with these afflictions. 87% of our time in homes and offices, according to the US EPA. And we wanted to really understand, how do features of the built environment, such as materials, access to light or nature, as well as the user experience, so for example, the noise or dynamic digital displays on the wall, how do those features impact people's well-being? So there's a growing awareness that our time spent in buildings can negatively impact our wellness. But surprising to me as an outsider who went into this area working with civil engineers and others was that the science behind this awareness and the recommended strategies to improve the situation are quite thin. So I thought, hey, the architects and the civil engineers, they would have done the studies to show if we have lighting in this way, we'll see this kind of better outcomes in terms of people's well-being. Unfortunately, they haven't. The studies are quite thin. So we were really interested in how we could build up the science to understand how buildings affect people, how to redesign spaces that count for those understanding. And then from the HCI part that I was into was, how do we design systems that can sense our afflictions and dynamically adjust spaces to help improve our health and wellness? So we did the first thing right. We started with a strong interdisciplinary team that includes expertise in buildings and architecture, those people in orange, computing, including HCI, security, AI, the folks in blue, and then experts in people, including psychology, health, privacy and law, education and organizational behavior, the folks in green. So it was quite an interdisciplinary team, all with a passion for creating a better built environment. We based our initial ideas on a model that illustrates how building features, individual outcomes, organizational outcomes, and societal outcomes are linked. In fact, this slide was from our initial pitch that we did in an internal Stanford competition to gain research funding for this project. I've annotated it, as you'll see, with these levels of user, community, and society that were not on that slide, but this was how we were thinking about it. And by building features, we mean things about the design and construction, but also the user experience. So for example, how noisy is it? Or is there access to natural light? And what types of materials are used? For example, is it natural wood furniture versus that white laminate stuff? And is there access to nature? Can you see plants either within the space or easily through a window? And if those features are negative, like I've shown in this example, they can lead to bad individual outcomes like stress, anxiety, and distraction. That's really at the user-centered level that I've been speaking to. These, in turn, can lead to organizational or community outcomes, such as a lack of productivity, waste, and a sense of or lack of belonging. That's at the community-centered level. And then finally, these community organizational outcomes can have impact at the societal level. So on our economy, on our environment, our health and well-being. So at least we were thinking about these three levels a bit from the start, even though I hadn't even thought about how to design from AI in this way when we started this project. Now, after that, what we do in my group is we often don't design anything, or at least don't try to build anything. We create a concept video that allows us to think about what we think that future is and write a script and shoot it and really, in some ways, prototype the early ideas and work it out while trying to create that video, as well as use that as a way to gain feedback on the ideas. So here's the video that we created about 5 years ago. So imagine an office of the future. Okay, and from an HCI perspective, how do I do that in a non-creepy way? Because that's too creepy. All right. So that's a vision of the future where buildings and people interact in a way that positively shapes our well-being. Fairly techno-optimist, but how would we even get to this future? How would we get there? We try to take a more scientific and integrated approach than prior work. Our first step was, could we establish the science and just understand how building attributes impact occupant health states in naturalistic settings over long periods? We also want to design those adaptations, including dynamic ones to support well-being. And before we can create and deploy any technologies, we need to understand what type of sensing and data collection people are willing to work with and which they'd prefer not to have. So I'll discuss these in turn. So we ran some preliminary online experiments where we showed people images and they had to imagine you were starting a new job in those places. And then we gave them some standard psychology surveys, and we're surprised to find a lot of effects that we thought would happen in the real world even happened in kind of a mechanical Turk study. After that, we designed a real experiment in a real space, so a controlled year-long lab experiment on campus with over 400 participants. And in this experiment, we systematically varied building features such as natural or artificial materials. So you can see the two rooms that we had. We had two rooms that were identical, except for the things that I'll show we varied. So we could vary the furniture in both rooms by moving it around. Natural or artificial light, because we literally paid people thousands of dollars to build a wall across the windows in one of those two rooms. And we also varied the images on the walls. You can't really see it here, but there's three large photos about yay big, where we varied them to show either diverse or non-diverse individuals. So in one condition, all three images were a bunch of white males, and in the other condition, there was diversity of both race and gender. So here you see the conditions. To measure what was happening, we had participants wear Empatica watches with electrodermal activity sensing, which is often used as a measure of stress. And we used standard surveys on stress, belonging, and creativity. And by the way, we had to stress them out on purpose. So we experimented with different ways to do this. The one that we found worked out well was we asked them at some set point in the study that they needed to give a talk in 2 minutes on their positive and negative personality characteristics. And you will see people's stress levels shoot up. I'm just going to show you the biggest results. You can look in the journal article that I cite here if you want to know more. The conditions with the natural materials help to decrease the stress in the participants. This was not the result I expected. I thought for sure it would be the windows and the natural light. That did have an effect, but this effect was larger. That was seen both with the subjective survey you see here, so the green being the natural wood condition and its self-report that you're seeing here, but this was also seen with the electrodermal activity, or EDA. So you see on the right, the EDA being lower for people with the natural wood condition, and they recover more quickly. Participants exposed to the windows, as I said, also had lower negative stress impacts. And for certain subgroups, there were different results in terms of divergent creativity with exposure in the different conditions. You can see that in the paper. Now, the next step really for this work is how do we run these types of systems and experiments in more naturalistic settings over longer periods, not just come into an office for an hour and fill out all these surveys. In fact, we have run a pilot of one that I don't have results yet to show you, but we had 7 people in those same 2 offices with us switching the conditions for something like 5 or 6 weeks that they were in the study. If we do that though, we need to use more sophisticated measures to measure our outcomes more automatically. You can't have people doing a divergent creativity study, every 2 hours, and a stress survey every 3 hours, and et cetera, a lot of these standard psychological tests. So we need to be able to infer some of this more automatically. Now, what outcomes are we interested in? In this project, we were interested in improving the following 5 outcomes. So stress, belonging, creativity, physical activity, and environmental behavior. We are actually intentional to not explore productivity, as it has been more explored, but also it introduces serious concerns of management misuse. So think about Amazon warehouse workers where, if you don't pack enough boxes quickly enough or you take too many bathroom breaks, you're gone. And we just didn't want to start with, hey, here's a tool, you can now do this. So how are we going to get this data more automatically? So we use AI, and we want to use AI with data that we triangulate from 3 types of sensors to infer these outcomes. So we start, even though I criticized it a few minutes ago, with self-report. But we move beyond simple surveys that people have to fill out. That is what the prior art for building studies is. And we've instead used things like experience sampling method, where we ask short survey questions periodically through the day, like how stressed are you on a scale of 1 to 7, that you might just answer really quickly with your watch. We can also use all those building sensors that have been put into buildings mainly for sustainability and security purposes, which let us know, for example, how many people are in a room and what's the energy use and how much recycling has occurred. And then finally, we get much of our data by leveraging the personal sensors that people carry and wear every day. So phones, watches, laptops. These are really sophisticated sensing devices that let us get at physical activity and stress through physiological sensing. We've even shown, for example, that with a mouse or with a trackpad on a laptop, we can sense someone's stress levels. My former postdoc did the mouse with John Canny at Berkeley. He did with me trackpad and car. With even their steering wheel, after like 7 turns, we can tell whether someone is stressed or not based on just the micro movements that are occurring to steer a car. Essentially, think about your muscles when you're stressed tightening, and we can detect that with using inverse kinematics. Now, because the type of data that I just described is highly personal and sensitive, it's important to include both technical and non-technical approaches to privacy and security. So from the start, we wanted to assess people's comfort level with collecting this type of data. We want studies that are opt-in and have ways to view and delete your data as part of the study. And finally, we need to secure the data and restrict its analysis on a need-to-know basis. So this is where we were in this research when I started to think about what did it mean to be human-centered AI. And I felt that we were really only doing user-centered design here. There might be a tiny bit of community-centered, like, oh, does the pizza delivery driver have to opt in when he comes into the building to make sure, he's not sensed? But I felt something was missing. How might we get at the community-centered and society-centered issues? And so now I'm going to show you some of our newer research that tries to get a better understanding of these higher levels. So let's think about the features that I've shown and see what levels we were designing. So at the user-centered level, we're mainly thinking about building residents who would want these features for themselves. Features that would encourage more exercise, let's say, or sense and adapt to their stress. So James is in his office, he's stressed again. and it starts playing cool jazz. And how do I do that in a non-creepy way? Because my grad students are going to be like, James is stressed again because they heard cool jazz. So that's not the right design. And we want to keep people's data private from the start. And we had that in mind. At the community center level, maybe we're thinking, you saw in the video, about helping people meet new people, because maybe that ambient display on the wall caused me to walk that direction instead of that direction. That's where the new person's sitting who I haven't met. Okay. And maybe want to protect some privacy of some random strangers who come in the building, but that was about it. At the society center level, we weren't really considering much. I said, maybe the economy, maybe public health, but I felt those were just kind of hand wavy. Yes, there will be effects there, but without thinking really concretely what it might be. So how might we get at the community-centered and society-centered issues? So now I'm going to show you some of our newer research that I think tries to get a better understanding of these higher levels, and that I will advocate is not the answer, but is an answer that is getting us closer to having a more integrated design process. Okay. So the uneasiness with some of the privacy implications at that community and society level led us to develop and run several design workshops. These workshops have helped us to do more of the community-based analysis that the project's been missing. We have workshop participants pose benefits and risks and work through these value trade-offs, as well as suggest potential interventions. We've now run the workshop with over 110 participants over 8 iterations. And I'll give you some ideas of what we're trying to do. So one of the big issues in these smart spaces is, how do you communicate to users in the community what kind of information is being tracked and sensed and inferred about you in this space? That's one problem that these systems will have to address. So a big part of our workshop is focused on how to communicate these issues to people who will use these hybrid digital physical spaces. So one way products communicate these issues today, maybe, or don't communicate, is using privacy policies. These policies are useless. At left here is an art piece where the artist has printed real privacy policies out from products you use every day. Nobody reads them. How many of you read these privacy policies? Okay, there's usually one or two. It's okay, you can say you do. There's always a few. But these are purely a legal construct to protect the companies that write them from lawsuits. They aren't meant to communicate to you what's really going on with the product. So instead, we were looking for another way to communicate what's going on in the building. So we've been developing this idea of implication design. This is where we try to embed a product's ethical implications directly into its design. For example, the iCam here is a webcam shaped like a creepy human eye. You really know it's watching you. That's a form of communication. You know what's going on. It's not ambiguous. There's some examples of this in the market today, but most of these interventions, like the little light that turns on your monitor or phone to say it's recording, don't really kind of communicate the full extent of the threat. This here is alias or parasite. You put it on your smart speaker, and it only unlocks when you give the keyword you've defined. You're assured that Google, Amazon, Apple, or Baidu are not listening into your conversations. So this is protecting you and communicating to you that it's shielding you. And so we wanted to combine these ideas of communication and protection in implication design into products that we would put into people's workspaces. So the uneasiness, as I said, with the privacy implications led to this design workshop. And what do? We have workshop participants pose these benefits and risks and work through the value trade-offs. So what does it look like? First is the idea that the participants are diverse in terms of domain knowledge. So we have technologists, we have designers, we have domain-specific experts, but they're also diverse in terms of their lived experience, because expertise alone, while providing a more nuanced understanding of potential technical harms and benefits, might result in blind spots that fail to consider harms related to social and identity-based characteristics. So the workshop's meant to be lightweight, and easy for everyone to participate. The original design is for one day, but we've also done workshops where we break it up for only a few hours over a few days, depending on the participants. And it's meant to be really easy. We have 3 rounds that are structured by using a deck of cards. So in the anticipation round, participants fill out the deck of cards by speculating on hypothetical situations, including the impacted users and other roles, as well as positive and negative implications. That's followed by the implication design round, where participants prototype potential designs for communicating or mediating the implications of the anticipated threats. And then finally, in the action round, the groups use the finished card deck and the implication designs to play a role-playing game where groups try to pose a potential threat and the paired team tries to use the design artifacts to counter them. So here's some of the artifacts that have come out of some of the workshops. So at left is an uncertainty communicator. The idea here was to surface how uncertain a system was about an inference. At the center is an anonymity bracelet that can anonymize the wearer's collected information. Again, these are not necessarily products, but are really artifacts that we can either call experience prototypes or other names to be used to spark further design. They're not meant as a final product. So implication designs or experience prototypes. In September, we applied the same technique in a workshop with 13 older adults in San Francisco to explore new speech-based AI health technologies. The 3 groups of participants had intersectional identities. So these are folks who are marginalized. In addition to age, over 50% were LGBTQ. Many had disabilities like blindness, wheelchair users, or immunocompromised, and they were of different races, et cetera. We started with this technology scenario, which I'll read out to you. Imagine having a device that can speak with you the same way humans can. It has been programmed by your doctor to ask questions related to your health and well-being. It learns as much as it can about you, and it provides that information to your doctors so they can adapt to your care. It also makes recommendations personalized to your needs and serves as a companion, actively listening to anything you want to tell it. Purposely has some creepiness built into it to spark conversation about some of the issues. Here's one of the many implication designs produced. At left, this showed different levels of accessibility of their data. The person wrote or said, the main doctor could have some things on the screen, a nurse would also have accessibility, and then the other one would be like the security person in your building. They would have a different level of interaction, and family and friends and all your senior friends, junior club or whatever, but it would have a variable level of security. Here was a device that you hang around your neck. If there's a problem, then you can press the buttons. Blue button, if you're panicking, you can press the blue button and it will regulate your breathing, relax, calm down. Red, stop everything, hopefully not die. Yellow, resume life. And I'll show you this third one. Detecting device in the doorway, so a caregiver that might be taking advantage can be caught. They said, doorway device detects how much money you have in case a caregiver steals money. So if a caregiver leaves with more money than they came with, it will stop them. Also detects chips on your credit card to see how many credit cards you entered and left with. So it's important to understand these aren't designs. I wouldn't build that, but they're starting points for designs. They get at the problems that these older adults see in a different way than other design techniques might surface. A professional design team might start from here, though we are right now exploring whether a round of speculative design where we deploy such a design in a real environment for a period of time is the next step before designing the true desired product. And that's where we are at this point. I think we haven't done enough yet of this implication design to test with a community in a real space. And so that's really where this project is trying to take that next step. So if I use my human-centered AI analysis at the 3 levels in the HPDAS case, it might look something like this. At the user-centered level, we work with and design for building residents, the companies that lease the space, building managers, and building owners. At the community level, we should work with anyone who might come into the building or even the neighbors. And at the society level, We need to analyze carefully how this system might impact many different groups, but in particular people with disabilities or other marginalized identities who may not want to disclose that to others. But it also raises general questions of privilege in society. Who has access to these fancy health-shaping buildings and who does not? And what happens if these buildings are used for workplace surveillance? So far, I'd say we focus more on these lower portions of the three levels of analysis. But the questions that I've raised here at the society level imply again that this analysis must analyze questions of power, which is often left out of technology research. If the decision makers decide to prioritize the user-centered design for managers over the community-centered design for the workers, surveillance state buildings is what will result from this research. And so we need to design actively to avoid this. This recognition of power reminds me of a great interview I saw last year by Ibram X. Kendi, the well-known author and MacArthur winner. The president, Crystal Williams of the Rhode Island School of Design, asked Dr. Kendi, what can artists and designers do in creating an anti-racist society? And he said, what is missing is an analysis of power. We live in a moment when different identity groups are advocating for their rights, their power, their presence, and pushing back. What is missing are the bridges of solidarity. We need to constantly be building those bridges. Historically, who has built those bridges? Artists and designers. I believe we as designers need to take on the analysis of design on three levels I've advocated: user, community, society, so we can properly identify and take on power, so we can build those bridges of solidarity. So what I want you to take away from this introduction is there are many great applications where we can use AI to help people be better at their tasks, to augment them to be better learners, better designers, to take better care of their body. My students are doing many of those applications. You read about them in the newspaper every day. They are there. But the key is to keep users, communities, and society's needs at the center of these smart interface designs. It's critical, I think, that we design at these three levels. Don't worry, we are in really the early days of finding the right design processes to practice truly human-centered AI. I hope I haven't given you the impression that I'm done and you must go do this. We are developing it. But you can start, I believe, by just designing beyond your direct user population and designing with communities beyond, and you will create AI systems that are more likely to have a positive societal impact.